Hey guys, this is Matt. I just wanted to show you a couple of things I implemented for accessibility for visually impaired users in Favorites, my visual speed dial app for the iPhone. This is running on an iPhone 4. I'm also kind of recording it using another iPhone 4. So I've updated some of the graphics and drawing code for Retina display, most of it, but not all of it, so there will be some rough edges, try to ignore those. So let me show you favorites. You can choose contacts from your contacts list and make these favorites for them. These are buttons that call or text or email or whatever. You can add up to 16 of them and they'll arrange themselves in this grid. You can move them about and delete them, as you can guess from the little cross button, just like the home screen. Get rid of that, and the tile to fill the screen, so that's fair enough. You choose the default action when you single tap a favourite. I've got it set to text because I SMS a lot more than I call. The initial default is of course the phone, and you can choose email instead if you like. Sometimes you might want to do something other than your default action, so what you can do is you can bring up this kind of screen that I call the overlay, and that lets you pick an action. So you can phone or SMS or email. That is my real email address. It was not my real iPhone number, by the way. Or you can hit these to choose any of the contacts, stored numbers or email addresses. This button lets you edit the details, including the display name and picking the default email address and phone number. You can even add a little badge to indicate that it's a work number or a mobile number like my dad there, or a home number like my mother. So that's fair enough. This is a big UI view and it's got a whole bunch of smaller UI views in it. They're not buttons, they're not UI buttons. It was just the way it was originally implemented. So this entire thing was invisible to VoiceOver, which is the accessibility, screen reading and navigating technology on macOS 10 and iPhone since the 3GS, and on the iPad as well. So it was completely unusable to visually impaired users or completely blind users, obviously. So what I did is I improved that a bit. So let's turn on VoiceOver. You can do it from settings.app, general accessibility. You can also switch on a shortcut to triple click the home button to either turn it on or ask you, and I've got it set to the latter, so I'm going to turn it on. Now my iPhone is set to British English, so it's not going to be some generic American voice. It's going to be a slightly schoolmistressy or headmistress English woman, so try not to be too frightened by that. Here we go.
VoiceOver on. Favorites, edit button.
So the way VoiceOver works is that it highlights and moves between accessible elements in an application. The buttons are in the navbar up here are automatically made accessible by the system, so it's selected that first one.
Favorites, heading.
So you can either tap stuff directly, or much better for visually impaired users, they can just go to the next accessible element or the previous one by swiping left or right. The way it works is you can tap stuff once just to select it and read the accessibility about it. In order to actually send a tap to the application, like a regular tap, if you don't have VoiceOver on, you double tap. So
Matt, work, button. Texts Matt's work number. Louise, button. Ian, button. Chris, button. Texts Chris.
You can see or you can hear that these are now accessible buttons. I just returned the accessibility trait of being a button and added accessibility label, which is the name of the person, and an accessibility hint, which tells you what will actually happen, like texts Chris or texts Matt. So that's fair enough. That makes this screen accessible, which is great. But there are basically two other screens that are custom in this app that need to be accessible: the overlay and the edit modes, where you can drag stuff and delete it. So let's look at the overlay first.
Matt, work, button.
Let's take me for example. So I've selected myself, and if I was a sighted user, which I am, and I didn't have VoiceOver on, I would double tap. To do that in VoiceOver, as I said, the first regular tap, in order to send it, you have to double tap. So thereafter the taps are sent normally. So I will triple tap in order to send a double tap into the application. So here goes.
Options, Matt.
So up it comes, and immediately my name is accessible, and if I swipe to go to the next accessible element,
Work.
it indicates that this is a work contact because I set it in as the badge for the contact as you saw earlier on. Now this thing is a UI view subclass. It draws all of this stuff within a single UI view. It only draws the bottom layer there if there's actually, more than one number or email address or whatever. So this was completely invisible to VoiceOver as well, which was terrible. So what I did was, you can basically say that the element itself is not accessible, but that it contains accessible elements within it. And I return either 3 of them or 6 of them, depending on what I'm showing here. And you just return their frames, which I'd already calculated anyway, because I use it to draw these paths and fill them in when you touch them. And you return labels and hints for each one of them. So if I swipe to go to the next accessible element, you'll hear what it says.
Call Matt iPhone button. Calls Matt's iPhone number.
So that calls Matt's iPhone number.
Text Matt iPhone button. Email Matt home button. Emails Matt's home address. All phone numbers button. Shows a list of all phone numbers for Matt.
So that's pretty good. That's pretty accessible. That can be heard and it can be used. You can navigate back and forth. It's pretty good. So let's get back out.
Cancel button. Closes the options screen.
The nice thing with VoiceOver is that once something is selected with this border, which is the VoiceOver cursor, you can trigger it by double tapping anywhere on screen. It's only if you single tap something that it'll then move the selection there. But if something's already selected, you can just double tap to trigger it. So I'm just double tap a random place, say my own face, to actually trigger that button.
Favorites, edit button.
The little bleep noise it makes is telling the user that the screen has changed, and that's just a single line of code to send that notification in your app. I've just changed the screen layout significantly. That's what causes that beep, which is nice. So the edit button's selected, so let's just jump straight in by double tapping.
Done.
Here we are. The sighted user can obviously drag to rearrange. We can do that as well. Let's say I select Neil first.
Drag to rearrange or double tap to delete.
I can drag him. Now for a sighted user, that's a sort of single tap and drag. As we said, in order to send the first tap you have to double tap, so in this case it'll be a double tap and drag. And we can rearrange. That little sort of escalating tone you heard is VoiceOver saying to the user, the layout of the screen has changed. It's not as major a change as the whole screen changing, the beepy sound, but it's indicating the layout of things has changed. And again, it's a single line of code. You just call a function that says that has happened, and it gives a nice audio cue that a change has taken place. So obviously it's questionable whether seriously visually impaired users would want to drag stuff about, but it's important that they are able to do so if they are capable of it and want to. So I'm just going to put Neil back there. Now the issue with this screen is that these little close buttons are not terribly accessible for the visually impaired. They're really small for one thing, so they're hard to hit. You need a lot of precision. Obviously be hard for people with motor impairments as well, and the fact is that in order to tell people where it is, you have to use spatial language. You have to say the top left of this area, and they don't necessarily know where the area is or what size it is or anything like that. They just know that they've touched in some part of it. So we can't really rely on that. So what I do is I check to see if VoiceOver is enabled, and if and only if VoiceOver is enabled, I will also accept a double tap on the element to delete it, or to obviously ask if you want to delete it. So if I select myself,
Matt, work button, drag to rearrange or double tap to delete.
I can obviously double tap, hold and drag, which is like a single tap drag, in order to drag it about as you saw. But I can also double tap, which in VoiceOver land is a triple tap, to delete.
Alert, delete this favorite for Matt.
And we can obviously swipe